Most seasoned entrepreneurs know that there is a difference between small businesses and large transnational corporations, and it's not just the revenue targets. Small businesses work more like remote outposts where people wear many hats. The second shift supervisor is also the barber and the quartermaster. Corporations, on the other hand, are more like political campaigns. You've got campaign managers and communication specialists, and success often hinges on how well you nurture and develop allies. However, if you spend your days navigating the worlds between small business and C-suite, then we've got just the expert for you. Scott Miles is an executive coach, career coach, and talent management professional. He helps clients blend corporate experience with their entrepreneurial zeal. Scott, welcome to the Subscription Maker Impact.
Thank you, Zachary. Excited to be here.
How do you describe the difference between entrepreneurship and C-suite dominance?
I have a great question right out of the gates. So typically entrepreneurs are drivers of change and innovation. And typically the C-suite individuals, depending on their business model and the operation of the organization, they're typically in place to ensure strategies and operations that are aligned with the policies and plans that are currently in place.
So what are some of the challenges that entrepreneurs face when they enter the growth stage and they start contemplating reaching the upper levels of middle market? You know, when they go from that, we're just trying to keep the lights on to, we got 10, $15 million coming in and we're thinking about, we're going to go for an IPO.
Yeah, that is an excellent question. So there's a number of things to keep in mind. So right out of the gates, think in terms as we go throughout this conversation that having the right players in the right place at the right time should be a constant conversation going on. Meaning from a startup to whether it's $3 million or a startup to $250 million, that team may not be the right team if you continue to grow to take it from 250 to say to 500 or even to under $1 billion. So it becomes very tactical. You start introducing so many new dynamics from scaling the operation, from hiring the talent, the financial management side. How do you maintain innovation, customer acquisition, retention? How do you have legal and regulation or regulatory compliance? How do you manage that risk? All of those should be in the operating plan as you continue to grow.
So could you give us some tips? I know I've heard people say that, the people who get you to 100,000 a month in annual revenue or monthly revenue are not the people who are going to get you to $1 million a month and monthly recurring revenue. So would you give us some tips on how we can blend those entrepreneurs and really maximize or optimize the relationships between those people?
Yeah, sure. So coming out of the gates, maybe you're a one-man show. And so there's a big difference for an individual maybe that has been in, we'll say, a W-2 or employment type scenario, and they go off and start their own business. Typically that individual right out of the gates is accustomed to getting up every single day and they have a process. I get up at 6, I jump in my car, I'm at the office, I'm out of the car, and I'm back home. And every 2 weeks I get a paycheck. When you make that, I guess, leap to entrepreneur side of things, you're now wearing multiple hats that you haven't had to wear before. So you're now responsible for scheduling. You're now responsible for answering the phone. You're now responsible for all your accounting. You're responsible for every single magnitude right out of the gates. So I think establishing a firm foundation from the beginning of understanding where your skill set truly lies, and then start assembling that team. And like we just referenced a few moments ago, that team will probably evolve as you continue to grow. So it's the introductions of additional policies, procedures. Maybe it's bringing on additional support. And typically, if we're growing revenue, we're talking about additional sales, marketing teams, etc. So making sure that you have a solid foundation that is scalable from the beginning makes a whole lot of sense. And it's very tactical, but it's fundamental, because if you don't have a solid foundation from the beginning, it becomes a deck or a house of cards, so to speak, and can quickly crumble down.
So what kind of time frame are we looking at? As we're trying to level up, what kind of a time frame, what kind of how much effort will we have to put into what it takes to make that move, to transition to a higher level?
So are we talking from entrepreneurship, or are we talking from maybe
from a personal standpoint? Okay, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm working it, but now we've grown, and now I need to become a corporate leader. I need to become someone who understands how this organization works and how to keep it going. Keep the light. We're beyond keeping the lights on. Now we're just trying to keep it from imploding on itself.
Yeah. And what you see, I think, in a lot of entrepreneurs, as this is their baby, and they are clearly the drivers of that change and innovation. And that's where that skill set relies. So then I don't want to say relinquishing control, but also understanding where you add the most value and contribute the most to the organization, and having those trusted advisors or teams in place that are lifting that load for you. Because very quickly, as you're driving forward with this very clear vision and attention, things on the side could start taking place and then causing significant issues within that organization. So it truly is identifying the right team members to surround yourself with, so you're not getting buried or you get blindsided by something that was completely missed.
This is a little early in the conversation for that, but I really want to jump on what you just talked about, those allies. A lot of times I talk to entrepreneurs and we talk about the kitchen cabinet. We talk about the private advisory group. So how do you find those people? How do you vet them?
Yeah, so the vetting process can be quite intense. A lot of it should come from, number one, individuals that you've associated with, whether you're part of any associations or through your network, or even an entrepreneur, other entrepreneurs. But as you start getting into it, you want to, number one, you want to vet the individuals heavily. What's their reputation in the marketplace? How long have they been in business? What type of business do they operate within? And what I really find the most helpful as you're going through that process, and again, it's very tactical stuff you start getting into as well, like background checks, financial stabilities, Dun and Bradstreet rating, like all of that stuff can come into play. But it ultimately comes down to the right fit for who I am and what my business is about. And that's not just having one conversation. It is having multiple conversations, or actually interviews. And the reason I suggest a minimum of 3 to 5 before making that decision is you like to ask the same questions over and over and see if they're consistent in their alignment, or if they're showing up differently in those conversations. From, are they flip-flopping, or it's uncertainty? So you're looking for consistent stability and trustworthiness. And are they going to let me maximize who I am, but also understand that they also have that trust and ability to provide that either constructive discourse or pushback to keep me on the straight and narrow?
Okay, Scott, let's shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
How do you describe being an executive coach?
How do I describe being an executive coach? I would say I look at myself as a trusted advisor to individuals to help bring out their individual genius. I think that would probably be, in a nutshell, how to describe it. I look at it as a coach as an individual, you take any great, and again, I'm not a sports guy personally, but everyone seems to be able to relate, to a sports analogy, so to speak. You take, and I grew up in the era with Tiger Woods, phenomenal golf player. I mean, he just has instincts and things that he was born with, but also put in that work and effort. But at the same time, if you take a look at Tiger Woods, he also notices that he can improve. So he surrounds himself with a nutrition coach. He surrounds himself with a swing coach. He surrounds himself with a fitness coach. So I look at myself as an individual that looks at things through a different lens and helps fine tune and tweak where that individual's skill sets or where there could be blind sides and bring them out to help make them more effective.
Now, do you believe that there's a difference between being an executive coach and being a career coach?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe that, being an executive coach or being, a career coach, they're both there and designed to support the individuals. And so if you look at executive coaching is more specific or in focus within organizations with a focus on leadership development, organizational impact, and performance improvement. Now, career coaching, on the other hand, is more, I would say, a broader approach, and it's focused on career-related topics and maybe individuals at various stages within their career. And within my organization, I happen to have a skill set that falls in both. And it's very interesting that sometimes they become a hybrid or combined within the coaching that takes place. And I'll elaborate on that a little bit. For example, one of the core foundations that our organization was founded on was executive career transition. And so then that's ultimately working with displaced individuals. When I say displaced individuals, that's typically restructuring inside organizations. And so those individuals coming in for career coaching typically are in a career and already have a career path or an idea of a career path they're kind of looking to pursue or a skill set that they've obtained and they want to continue down that line. But then on the other hand, you also get individuals that, come out of corporate America, maybe that's 15, 20 years and say, Scott, I'm tired of the corporate grind. I'm looking to start my own business. So then it becomes a blend of not only career coaching, but also executive coaching.
Okay. So you talked a little bit about a hybrid model in your coaching.
Yes.
Does that come into play? How does that work in a world where you're walking that line between entrepreneur and C-suite, where you're trying to level up your organization and your organizational skills? How does your coaching style impact or influence that kind of growth?
Yeah, certainly. And so I'm very specific and transparent on the type of coaching that I engage in. And so when someone says, well, how would you describe your coaching? And I say it's result oriented, meaning my focus is if you're coming in from a career transition side of things, my whole objective at that point is to fine tune your skill sets and make you as marketable as possible to navigate that job market and land the position that you're trying to obtain. And the same thing happens within the executive coaching side. We essentially, it's a contract that we enter in with very clear objectives and milestones of what we're trying to obtain, what those results look like. And so again, it's always based on, are we hitting those results that we're trying to obtain? So results oriented, whether it's in career transition or the executive coaching.
Okay. So Scott, tell us a little bit about Executive Ally.
Sure. So Executive Ally, man, It has been a phenomenal run. And I say that, I'll just give you a quick little history. So, our organization was originally founded back in 1978, like I alluded to a few moments ago. And it was specifically designed for senior level executive, the top 1% of the food chain in corporate America, to work with those displaced individuals. And that organization ran very successfully all the way through up the mid 90s. And in the early 90s, my parents actually acquired the consulting firm. And I want to say I want to been a part of it since the early 90s. I was mowing lawns back then, but I've been in and around that industry since the early 90s. And so, how Executive Ally Miles Lahine has evolved was we always have that paramount of career transition, but we opened up that food chain to cover all, not just senior executives, but all the way down to if there is plant or manufacturing foods. In the late 90s, then we introduced executive coaching, strategic management and planning, and also a line of HR products and services, which typically focus around sexual harassment training, workplace violence training, etc. And just like the world of business has evolved, our organization has evolved as well with the times. And so our core focus today still remains on executive coaching, career transition, and also we look at ourselves as an executive ally to organizations in the form of being a strategic partner. Instead of just covering the points of, A, B, C, and D, organizations' needs of today, I'd like to look at a full circle and a holistic approach to being an ally to the organization, whether that could be compensation and benefits, any organizational training or development, like I referenced the sexual harassment training, workplace violence training, or even succession planning for organizations. So being that strategic ally to an organization where necessarily organizations, maybe the smaller firms necessarily do not have the funds or the infrastructure to take on a full-time HR, human resources department, then they're able to retain our services and provide those services.
Now, would you consider your company, or does your company consider itself a productized service company?
Productized service company. The short
So
answer,
do you basically, go ahead.
I was going to say the short answer is no, because it's always about service. And I don't believe there's a one product or one solution to take a product and throw it into an organization and say, hey, here's the system that you need to follow. I believe there's certain foundational structures and policies, procedures that need to be in place. But it really comes down to, and I think that's what makes our firm unique, is the ability to go in there. I hate to use the word a la carte, but it's really to sit down with the organization and again, take that holistic look at where they're at and where they're trying to go and what deficiencies either that they have or are looking to enhance. And so then going in and working, with the senior leadership or ownership of the organization to meet those needs. So I don't think there's any one product or service that is, I'll say, out of the box or is just one bit.
Yeah, I guess where I was going with that is that if you're dealing with companies that have different revenues. So
Yes.
you're dealing with the smaller companies and you're dealing with larger companies, then there's a price point that those companies can afford to take on. And certain services benefit from saying, okay, here are the clear guidelines for what we're going to provide at this price point. More, that's what I'm talking about from a productized service, where you're saying, okay, I understand that you can only afford so much. So
Yes.
given that situation, we're going to be able to provide a given amount of service. So
Yeah.
that it benefits both of us. We don't put you out of business, but we can still afford to keep the lights on?
Yeah. So that is a great question, and it actually does go back to what I just alluded to for the customization. So, here's a hypothetical. I mean, this is definitely a real situation. Is there's a number of local restaurants that we help service and provide. They do not have the infrastructure to have a full-time HR staff that they can go to, and so ultimately what we came to and say, all right, here's a budget that we put together. And so this client is now on retainer and say, all right, we are now the go-to for any HR related issues. And so we give them a specific amount of time per month. And then as things arise, then, whether it's a phone call, whether it's an email, or whether it's coming on site to address a specific issue. If there's, let's just say, an issue with a customer that needs to be resolved outside of it and it involves some HR stuff, then yes, we're involved. It's going in and saying, hey, we've just implemented a new point of sale system, but it's not necessarily referencing our employee handbook. Can we make these updates to our employee handbook? So the short answer is yes. And it looks for whatever those specific needs might be. So there are guidelines or there are things that we could specifically put into the contract to address those specific needs that might arise.
So I want to back up a little bit.
Okay.
You talked about being around the consulting service provider. You talked about being around that industry since you were mowing lawns. So my question is, do you believe that children should be taught entrepreneurship?
Whoa. Should children be taught entrepreneurship? I think that's a loaded question. I think children should be children, but I will answer that question directly. I'm not so sure if entrepreneurship can be taught, but I also believe that in the educational system, foundational elements to entrepreneurship should be taught, which I think they're greatly and or unfortunately lacking into today's educational model. And what I mean by that, there's foundational things from understanding how money works. If there were classes that were taught about even just balancing a checkbook or being able to understand a spreadsheet from financials or cost analysis at a young age, I think that could be 100% gamified and make it entertaining for children to learn what an interest rate is, what's the rule of 72, things like that at a basic level. So does that teach entrepreneurship? I think that, again, children should be children, and the creativity that comes out of those kids, as they move into young adult point, will start to find their own stride. But yes, I mean, you can look at university settings now, and there's even pre-college courses that you can take about entrepreneurship. But usually it comes from, kids being kids. And I love talking to kids. I mean, they don't have filters, number one, but they come up with these creative stories and ideas. And I would really love to be able to harness that creativity. But if we're talking fundamentals or foundational things on business or how business is run, I would love to see them come into their own.
Yeah, I guess where I was going with that is I interviewed a woman a while back, and she talked about, she was a single mom. She was taking care of her daughter. And one of the things she did, the kid's like 5 or 6 years old, and her mom used to sit around and put together marketing packets. Wow. And it was like, okay. And she'd pay her. She says, okay, you're doing your thing. Now, obviously, the number one thing, your job as a kid, your number one job is to go to school. But to earn a little extra money here, you can put together, 10, 20 of these marketing packets, and I give you a little extra cash. That's kind of where I was going with that.
Yeah, I love that stuff. And again, I think it comes down to the gamification, like in school. I mean, if you're sitting there and you're playing games in school that are focused on around business, I'm not sure if you've ever played the cash flow game by Robert Kiyosaki, but they have a kids version. So why aren't they then introducing that at a very young age? Again, teaching them the fundamentals of how money works, but then also allow that creativity to come out. And maybe there's specific school projects that is then tied back to like, yeah, let's create a fictitious business, but then take what you've learned in math, what you've learned in marketing, or what you've learned in art class to maybe monetize that in a form or fashion in a fun way, then yes, absolutely. I think that would be fantastic.
So, what advice would you give youth and young entrepreneurs who want to pursue a career similar to yours?
Whoa. So, man, I don't think we have enough time today to talk about the evolution of my career. But at the end of the day, I think having those basic foundations of what we've just discussed, understanding basic math, sales is huge. If you can learn how to sell, which then is tied into maybe persuasion or influence, and then also tie in maybe some psychology. I think that is setting you up. But I think the biggest thing, if you could put an individual into an environment, is, I'm a firm believer that anyone that is in coaching or has done coaching at some point in their life has done some type of retail sales. That is a unique animal within itself and exposes you to the multiple dynamics of human nature and human interaction. And if you have the ability to operate in there, learn how to interact, diffuse, read people, that becomes, I think, paramount. But at the end of the day, I think you need to have a passion for human capital. And what I mean by that, it comes back into the coaching side of things, is you have the ability or unique ability to take a look, at an individual, but also hear verbally what they're saying or what they're putting down. And a lot of times individuals will go through this process and like, man, I'm just so confused, or I don't see anything. And after, a 15, 20-minute conversation I have a very clear path of what drives this individual, what their unique skill set is, what they're passionate about. And so then having that ability to take it and repackage it for them and help bring clarity. So it really comes down to, I think that understanding sales, but also becoming a good listener, I think is huge.
Now, you just used one of the big I words. You said influence.
Wow.
Now I want to go to another of the I words, impact.
Okay.
How do you define impact?
Impact. Impact. I think that is then again having either influence or persuasion on an individual or organization, or just on a global perspective as a whole, that drives, influence or change. I think that would probably be significant impact.
So how do you coach impact? Or is it even possible to coach impact?
Is it possible to coach impact?
So where this comes from is, I believe that because of AI, we have to move from promising value to delivering impact. We got to do more. When I hear value, I hear return on investment. Right. So if the only thing you're competing on is value, then you're at a loss, because I can always come up with an AI, given enough cost, enough pricing flexibility on the customer side, I can always come up with something that's valuable enough to displace most people.
Yeah.
AI changes everything. So at that point, we got to talk impact. We got to talk about moving beyond just the numbers and getting into who you are and how you deliver what you deliver.
Yeah. So I think impact also then, becomes subjective where it's tangible and intangible on the outcomes. But ultimately, the impact is resulting in actions and initiatives that ultimately manifest in various forms of change. That could be social impact, that could be environmental impact, it could be economic impact, it could be organization, cultural, or global impact. And the introduction of AI has it dramatically, and I think we're just right at the front end of it, has dramatically shifted on what ultimately impact is going to look like. But at the end of the day, there's always that human factor that is involved. So I think utilizing, AI or machine learning, it still comes down to what is that tangible or intangible value that an individual can bring and utilize today's technology to drive those initiatives.
It's really odd, but no matter what technology you use or how technologically advanced we become, it's always about the people. If anything, technology has made us more human. Because of technology, we can personalize things. We can keep up with things. We can provide services to people in a more personalized, one-off situation so that we meet their individual needs. So technology to me is really about, once you get past the technology, I'll put it this way, once you get past the technology, you still got to be human.
Yes.
And the only thing we have to compete with technology is our humanity.
Yes.
That connection we make.
Very much so. Very much so.
So once we start talking impact here on the Subscription Maker Impact, we get into fire givers. We believe that the podcasters and their guests are this generation's fire givers. They're the people that will hand down the knowledge that will advance or move the next generation forward. So what are you most passionate about? And what kind of skills and tools do you want to hand down to the next generation?
Man, that is a phenomenal question yet again. I believe, man, you threw the word tools in there, and that kind of threw me a little bit because I look at tools.
We're talking fire here.
Yeah, we're talking fire here. I think it's number one, coming back to your core and obviously recognizing that we're all humans and treating each other like humans respectfully. Family is vitally important to me, and I hope that matters to everyone else that will be hearing this. Health and wellness, and that's very broad when I say that, but taking care of yourself physically, but also mentally. I believe critical thinking and not just relying on AI or Chat GPT to provide you the answer to something, but truly utilizing, our God-given brain to really think through things, I think is vitally important. So teaching that skill set. And then, truth. I think truth is extremely important, is being aligned on what truth actually is and being a seeker of truth, but also being receptive to constructive discourse. And what I mean by that is, those are 7 billion, 8 billion individuals in the entire world. And, we are all unique and we're all not going to agree. But if we can all respectfully understand that we have different opinions, different philosophies, different approaches, but be respectful of those to ultimately arrive at a truth or at least an understanding, I think I think that would be vitally important. I would love to be able to pass that down.
As we start to wrap up, Scott, is there anything you wish more people would ask you?
Yes. If there was a question more people would ask me. Yeah, sure. So out of we've been talking about, executive coaching and career coaching, and those typical engagements. So I think the question that I would appreciate coming out of those sessions, or as we're wrapping up those sessions, is, Scott, do you have anything else outside of the program or what we agree that we're going to be coaching on that you would suggest? And I would say, yes, absolutely. Is you need to take care of yourself. And so it comes around that health and wellness, what I just mentioned a few moments ago. You can be highly intelligent, you can be highly driven, but if you're neglecting the health portion, the nutrition side, the wellness side, the mental health side, understand that has a ripple effect across your overall performance. So if you're looking to increase your own performance as a leader, as a manager, as a director, as an employee, I can hands down say, if you put some of that effort into maximizing or optimizing your overall health and wellness, your overall performance will increase significantly.
Is there anything new on the horizon that you feel comfortable sharing with us?
Sure. And I think that I'm going to sound like a broken record now, but it really does come back to this health and wellness is, I've been, I don't want to say a fitness fanatic, but I will say a fitness fanatic for close to 30 years now. And unfortunately, I don't see the most healthy individuals that I work with. Man, I work with some highly intelligent, driven individuals, but I'm looking at them and saying, my gosh, are you going to keel over at work because we're not addressing these specific issues? If we then combine or incorporate in some of the core coaching that we're doing to help refine or optimize some things on the health and wellness side, I want to see this part. Number one, I truly believe that their performance is going to increase across the board, but then they're also going to be able to perform for much longer. Their stamina is going to be increased. Their clarity is going to increase. So a long-winded response to your question is I think it's incorporating a health and wellness component into the overall coaching. Now, I may not get the corporate side on buy-off on that, but as far as the individual coaching on the executive coaching side and the transition side, I will 100% include that.
Now, do you think part of that, the lack of wellness and the lack of attention to wellness, is that more of a time management issue? Or if people felt that they had enough time, that they could take time out of their day, if they could look at their priorities and say, okay, I can fit in an hour to do something, to walk, to roll or whatever, do some type of fitness activity. Is that more of a time management kind of prioritization issue?
So time management, and it's a very dynamic question. Number one, I'm going to state, I don't believe there's any one right diet for everyone. I don't believe there's any one right training program. But what I typically see with individuals is they say, I need to make this radical change, and they make this radical change, and it's too much too soon. So if you then, and again, they could get motivated by listening to a podcast, they could get motivated by reading an article or seeing something on the TV, right? And they try to make too much change too soon. And so the motivation quickly falls away. But if you then incorporate that in your overall lifestyle as part of discipline, I selfishly say for a lot of individuals, and I was going to wrap up with this part is like individuals, and this is speaking specific to career transition. If you have an individual that has been in a position for the past 15 years and all of a sudden they're displaced and we're no longer employed and now they're home getting salaried, at the end of the day, their life is going to completely change. For the past 15 years, they've gotten up every single day, Monday through Friday at the same time, driven the same route, gotten home, and they've done that over and over. The reality is they don't need to get out of bed on Monday. They don't need to get out of bed on Tuesday. And so I say selfishly put yourself first as you're going through this process. And what I mean by that is, as we all know, once we start getting into our days, there's ups and downs and there's things that come out of left field all day. So whether that's taking, 15, 20 minutes first thing in the morning, whether if the day goes to heck in a handbasket, no one can take that away from you. So yeah, I believe time management and purposely building that into your schedule makes a whole lot of sense. And as you start seeing these small little results, you're going to want to do more for yourself because you're feeling better, you're sleeping better, you're being more productive. So yeah, I believe incorporating that as far as a time management side of things, absolutely. Just put it on your calendar, build it in your schedule.
What's the best way to follow you on social media?
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn, Scott Miles. Scott D. Miles is my actual tag in my URL. That would by far be the best way professionally to connect with me.
Scott, thank you for joining us on the Subscription Maker Impact.
Zachary, I appreciate it. It's been great.
Before we wrap, too many people work way too hard and earn too little from their online businesses. You don't have to be one of them. And that's a wrap.